Hi and welcome back to the channel. Well, if it's your first time here, my name's Andrew and thanks for joining me. If it's not your first time here, as I say every week, my name's still Andrew and thanks for coming back. Well, as you probably know, I did a video last week on how to create cinematic footage using the DJI Neo 2 straight out of the box and just using the app with no controller. So this would mean that you haven't got any control over things like white balance or your shutter speed or any other settings. Everything is done directly from the app, and that can be quite limiting. Now, whilst footage like that may be okay for things like social media, if you want to take it up to another level and try and get the best out of your drone, then you are going to need to use a controller and go into some of the more manual settings to change the way that your footage is actually filmed. And this is where ND filters come in. Now, I have been lucky enough that I've been sent a pack of ND filters from Freewell. They've sent me their standard 3-pack, which is the ND 8, 16 and 32. They've also sent me their Bright Day pack, which is their polarized versions. Again, it's ND 8, 16 and 32, and I'll go through with you exactly what polarization filters do later on in the video. And they've also sent me their Everyday pack, which is their CPL filter, the UV filter and their mist filter. And I'll go through exactly what all these filters do throughout this video. So whichever pack you buy, they all come in a little white box like this, magnetized on the front. And then you've got the instructions on how to fit the actual lenses onto the camera itself. They come with a little adhesive metal ring which fits over the top of the lens, and once that's attached, it's not coming off. And then the filters themselves just go onto that magnetic ring to secure them in place. And then also within the pack, you've just got the lenses in a nice secure case. You've got a little cleaning cloth and your warranty and instructions QR code on the back. So that'll mean by the end of the video, you'll know exactly what filters to use in what situations and what they do without having to do any more guesswork or fiddling about and trying to see what works where. Now, to get the best out of the drone, you are going to have to go into the manual settings, and that's not as daunting as it sounds, as it is really quite straightforward. But by going into the manual settings, it allows us then to add on to the ND filters, and that's going to enable us to do the settings to get that motion blur, which is exactly what you want on your footage. Now, the reason that motion blur is so important is that when we look at things in general day-to-day life, everything is not as crisp and sharp as you think it is. So, for example, if you're going, say, driving a car, whilst you can see the car in front of you is nice and sharp and in focus using your eyes, towards the sides of the car, you'll see that the scenery is passing very quickly and it's blurred out. And that's the type of effect that we need to go to when we fly in with a drone. Now, when it comes to using ND filters, it's all based around the frame rate that you're using. And on the DJI Neo 2, we've only got 3 frame rates, being 30, 50 and 60. So we need to set the exposure to twice the frame rate that we're using. So, for example, if you're using a frame rate of 30, your exposure should be 1/60th of a second. If you're using 50, it should be 100th of a second. And if you're using 60, it should be 120th of a second. Now, ND filters are normally described as being sunglasses for drones. So what they do is they go onto the front of the drone lens, and then they reduce the amount of light that comes and hits the sensor. So if you're using a good quality ND filter, it means that the light coming in is not going to be suffering from any color changes. It's also going to allow you to use slower shutter speeds, and that's going to give you more cinematic motion blur. You're also going to avoid any overexposed footage, and all these 3 put together means that you're going to get a much more pleasing and cinematic result. Now, because the DJI Neo 2 has a fixed aperture of 2.2, it means that you can't change the actual size of the aperture. It's also got a very small sensor. So this means that if you are using it in bright daylight without ND filters, the drone is going to have to crank up that exposure very, very high in order to limit the amount of light that comes in and hits the sensor. So the only way that we can mitigate this is, as I said earlier, by using ND filters. So if you're using a frame rate of 30 frames a second, reducing that frame rate down to 1/60th a second is going to mean that your exposure is going to be really, really blown out. And if your exposure is blown out, there's no way to bring it back. So we use the ND filters to allow us to bring that exposure down correctly. And that's why basically, if you want smooth cinematic footage, ND filters are essential. They're not a sort of optional extra. You really need to invest in some good ND filters and learn to use them properly. Now, on the DJI Neo 2, you've only got a 2-axis gimbal, which stabilizes both up and down and left to right. It doesn't compensate for the rotational aspect of the drone or the yaw. And this means that if you do rotate too quickly, you can get micro jitters on your footage, especially if you are filming in higher frame rates. Now, using an ND filter, as I said earlier, does allow for slower shutter speeds, and this can go some way to mitigating those micro jitter effects and smooth out your footage. And that's going to make it look more as if it's filmed on a proper 3-axis gimbal as opposed to a 2-axis gimbal. Now, if you use the DJI Neo 1, which only had a single-axis gimbal, then you may have noticed that a lot of the footage was subject to these micro jitters. But because you've got a better gimbal on the DJI Neo 2, you can somewhat eliminate all this effect by using the ND filters. So as I said at the beginning, I've been sent the 3 packs. Now, the first pack is the standard pack, which is just the ND 8, 16 and 32. And this is going to be perfect if you're out filming and there's no sort of reflections. So if you're not anywhere near water, if you're not filming in a city where you're not going to get reflections off a building, then using the plain standard pack is going to be absolutely perfect. Now, depending on the weather conditions and how much cloud cover or how bright it is and the time of day, is going to depend on which ND filter you're going to need to use. So if you're going out and it's quite cloudy, you're going to need something like an ND8. If it's going to be more in the morning or the afternoon, then possibly a 16. And if it's going to be really, really bright, then you need to go up to a 32. So having a pack which goes up to an ND32 is going to be absolutely ideal if you're somewhere like me in the UK, Europe, where it's not super bright. You do get a lot of cloud cover. You're not going to need anything higher than an ND32. And this is the point where I stop for 2 minutes and say, if you are finding it useful, if you could do the like and subscribe thing, that would be absolutely fantastic. It's also linked below for buy me a coffee. If you'd like to do that, that would be great as well. It's the 2nd of January. It's absolutely freezing. I was out mountain biking earlier and I did see 3 brass monkeys carrying some balls looking for a welder. So that would be great. Any funds I do get from buy me a coffee are just going to go back into the channel for new equipment reviews and that type of thing. So now I'm going to crack on with the rest of the video. So next we got the bright day pack. So if you're somewhere like down the beach, and you're filming where there's a lot of water and you're going to get glare coming off the sea, then having a polarization filter is going to be ideal because it means that you can reduce the amount of glare that's coming off the sea and hitting the lens. Similarly, if you're in a cityscape and you've got a lot of reflections coming off the glass, that is, again, is going to reduce the amount of glare you get by using a polarization filter. Now, a good side effect of having polarization filters means that it's going to actually boost the colors of your footage to make them pop more, and it's going to make the sky look a lot bluer. And again, that's going to enhance the footage. So it does give you a really nice overall effect using polarization filters on your footage. So having the polarization filters are going to be perfect if you're filming on the beach, if you're doing cityscapes around lakes, or even if you're out in a forest and you want to bring those colors of maybe the autumn leaves or the spring leaves more enhanced into the camera. So if you are only going to go for 1 pack, then polarization filters are the way to go because it gives you the best of both worlds. And then you've got the everyday pack. Now, the everyday pack are not ND filters. They come with 3 filters, being a CPL or polarization filter. And that, again, is still going to reduce the amount of glare you get in if you're by the sea, skiing, buildings, whatever. It also comes with a UV filter, and that may help if you are filming things quite a distance away and it reduces the haze. But it's also a good filter just to have on the camera anyway, because it means that it's going to give your lens a little bit of protection should you crash the drone. So it's better to damage maybe a lens on the front of the camera than the actual lens of the camera itself. And then finally, you've got a quarter mist filter. And what that does is if you're filming out towards the evening time, it's going to soften some of the light that you've got coming, or if you're again out in a cityscape and there is a lot of neon, it's going to give you a nice halo effect around some of the lights and soften those tones down for you. So the first one we got is going to be a standard CPL or polarization filter, and that's just a standalone filter. It's not an ND one. So this is going to be useful if you're filming somewhere where you don't need to reduce the amount of light, but you still want to reduce the amount of glare that you've got coming off a surface such as water, or you will want to just generally enhance the colours of wherever you are. Like I said, in a forest, something like that, you want to get the foliage brighter or brighter skies, then just using a plain old CPL filter will be perfect for you. But remember, using a CPL filter alone will not allow you to adjust the shutter speed and won't give you any motion blur. It's purely to reduce any glare that you got from other objects. Now, using a UV filter is often misunderstood because previously you'd have to have a UV filter if you're using traditional film to record, but obviously using digital we don't need that. So it's more of a sacrificial barrier you've got between the elements and the lens of the drone itself. It's much better to have that on the camera, and if you crash the drone you're only going to damage the actual filter itself as opposed to the lens on the camera. It also means it's going to protect the camera from things like dust and moisture, especially if you're somewhere like me where I live near the beach. I do a lot of filming. Sometimes I come back, you haven't noticed the spray, but the lens is covered. So it's always better to have, if anything, a UV filter on the front of the camera, if nothing else. And then finally, we've got the quarter mist filter. Now, if you're filming just using the Neo 2 and your app, you know that you can't control the sharpness. So using this filter does reduce the amount of digital sharpness you're going to get in your footage. It's also going to soften your highlights, which is a good thing. And finally, if you are shooting in somewhere where there's a lot of neon or bright lights, it's going to give you a nice bloom effect around those lights, and that's going to be much more appealing and cinematic as well. So that's the basics on ND filters themselves. Plan is now to go out with the drone, the controller and the filters and show you exactly how to set them up and to get the best out of the filters themselves. And before I crack on with this, if you are finding it useful, if you could do the like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so I've made it on the beach and I'm going to look at sorting out the settings ready to use the ND filters. So I've got the drone on manual at the moment and it's in 4K at 60 frames a second. So you can see from the screen that my shutter speed is 1/2500 and my ISO is 230. So both of those are way too high. I am exposing for the brightest part of the image, which you should do because obviously if you are flying, you don't want to have it exposed for somewhere that's dark and then turn out into bright because that's just going to blow the highlights out. So I need to see about reducing now that frame rate down to 1/120. So you can see now that I've set the frame rate of 1/60th a second because I'm using 30 frames a second, and exactly how blown out that image can be. And this is why we need to bring in the ND filters to bring those details back into the footage. Now, because it is sunny, I'm using my 32 ND filter, and I'm also using the polarization one because I want to try and cut down on the glare. So if I put that over the top of the lens, you can see it's going to go from 2500, and straight away the exposure has gone down to 1/120. So that's exactly what we are looking for at the moment. The ISO is still a bit high at 200, but we can see about reducing that and see what effect that's going to have as well. So if I do go into the ISO settings, I just need to press, and you can see it's got the ISO as auto. So I'm going to change that down to 100, try and get as low as possible. And you can see my shutter speed now has gone down to 1/60. So that's too low for this particular filter. So we could try and bring that back up to 1/120 by using the ND16. So you can see from that I put on the ND16, I've changed the ISO down to 100. I've set the shutter speed to 1/120, and my evaluation compensation is down to -0.3, and that's going to be perfect for what we want to do today. As I said, I want to expose for the brightest part of the image. Now, if I'm filming down this way, those settings are going to be ideal. But if I want to film the other end of the beach, which is away from the sun, if I turn that round, you can see that my evaluation has dropped to -2. So that's going to be way too low. So I need to change the ND filter to bring it back up to a more acceptable level. So now I put on the ND8, and if I'm filming that end of the beach, you can see that it's dropped to -1, which is still a bit too low. So I'm going to change the ISO to bring that back up. But you do want to try and keep the ISO as low as possible at all times. So obviously 100 is going to be too low, so I'm trying to bring it up to 200 and see where we go from there. So that now with the ISO as 200, the exposure has been 1/120, the frame rate has been 60. You can see that my evaluation compensation is 0, so that is spot on for flying in this direction along the beach. So I'll show you exactly the effect we're going to get now using the ND filters at that frame rate. So the frame rate you're using can also make a difference to what ND filter you're going to use. So for example, I'm set at 4K 60 at the moment, and I've got the evaluation at spot on 0. But if I reduce that down to 30 frames a second, that's going to affect the evaluation. So we go into that, change it down to 30 frames a second, and you can see now that it's increased to +0.3. We may need to change the ISO again. So if we bring the ISO down a little bit, that's going to bring it down to 0.7. So you do need to play about with the ISO and the manual exposure settings to make sure you do get the right settings, or as close as you can, depending on which way the drone is going to be flying and depending on which frame rate that you're going to be using. And also remember, it is always better to be underexposed than overexposed, because if you're underexposed, you can bring those shadows back in post-production, whereas if you're overexposed and they're blown out, there's nothing you can do and you've lost all that data. So always err on the side of caution and always go for a lower value than a higher value if you can. So you can see that using ND filters will have a massive effect on your footage and giving you that motion blur, which is going to elevate your footage up to the next level. So if we look at the polarization filter, I'm just going to put it over the front of the drone. So that's the image without any filter on it. And the minute I put it over, and again, if you look at the sea, so you can see the difference between having the filter on with the sky and the reflection coming off the glare on the wet sand as well. Now, as far as the polarization effect goes, I'm going to take the drone out over towards the sea, over some of the sand, which has got some water on it, and we can compare the difference between the polarization being off and on. Just wait for this jogger to go past. So you can see there's very little glare coming off the water there. So if you are filming anywhere there's water, having a CPL filter, either one which is purely a CPL or having an ND filter with a CPL built in, is an absolute necessity if you want to get really nice, smooth, cinematic shots with no glare and bring out all the highlights you've got within the environment that you are filming. Okay, so that's ND filters. Hope you found the video useful. If you could do the like, subscribe and the notification bell, that would be greatly appreciated, because it does help the channel grow, and I'm trying to get over the 4,000 subscriber mark by the middle of January, if that's possible. If you would also like to buy me a coffee, there's a link for that below, and any funds from that will go towards new equipment for the channel as well. If you've got any questions in relation to the DJI Neo 1, the Neo 2, the Mini 4 Pro, the Mini 5 Pro, or the Hover X1 Pro, Pro Max, or ND filters, or action cameras in general, just let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you again in the next few days. Thanks. Bye.